Hi friends, it's Unicorn, and today's video is a end of the year special because I want to talk about my most disappointing books of 2023. I know this kind of video is always gonna be a little bit controversial, especially because some of the books that I have on my list is actually very well received. So I want to stress that this is totally my personal opinion, and frankly, everybody's reading experience is very different. I know that I totally pick up some books from other people's DNFs or disliked books just because the way that they don't like it make me think that I will like them, and I was totally right because I enjoyed those books that I picked up from one of these lists. So the fact that I didn't enjoy these books doesn't mean that they are bad books or they're not the book for you. Everybody is very different, and also because they are on this list doesn't mean that I hated them. Some of them are actually quite good in my opinion, and I enjoy them in a decent amount. Just I wanted them to be better, so that's why they're in this disappointing book list. So in today's video, I have 6 books that I had finished, and I was somehow disappointed in one way or another, and I have 4 books that I DNF'd. So let's talk about the books that I finished first. The first book is already gonna be a surprise to many. It is The Parable of the Sora by Octavia E. Butler. Let me just say, this book is by no means a bad book. I feel like it's fine, and I'm going to continue with the sequel and of course more books from Octavia E. Butler. It was just that it was quite a struggle when I read it. This is a classic science fiction written in 1993 and set in the early 2020s. With climate change and the economical crisis, California has become a danger zone, with all the residents living inside didn't know if they could see another day. The story is centered around a 15-year-old girl who lived in a gated zone with her father, and she suffered from hyperempathy, so she can feel other people's pain. And one day she figured out she must have her voice heard in order to protect her loved ones, and then she set out to fight for survival. I love dystopian and everything, and I feel like the setting of this book is fascinating. However, the emphasis on spiritual world is kind of hard for me to get on board. I know this book was written a while ago, but the same kind of like spiritual settings in a dystopian world reads like a little bit repetitive for a modern reader like me. And on top of that, the pacing of this book is just so slow for me. This is definitely a character-driven story and takes a lot of time to build around the characters and leave them space to grow. However, for me, I like the tensions in plots, and I'm actually grateful for this book because this is the first time that I realized that I actually prefer a plot-driven story rather than a pure character-driven story. And with that said, I'm still very curious about what's going to happen to the characters in the second book in this series because it took a whole book in the first book to build up the characters. So I'm gonna continue with the sequel, and after I read this book, everybody told me that I should start with Kindred with Octavia E. Butler, which I kind of agree, so I'm going to read that book in the new year as well. The next book here is Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks. I had so much hope for this book because first of all, it was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and then it has so many elements that I usually like to read. So this book is a historical fiction set in the 1980s in the UK. Yamiya is a very vibrant young woman lived in a Jamaican neighborhood in London, and she lived for the weekends. On the weekends, she'll just go out with her friends, dancing and drinking and just enjoy their lives. One day, she met the love of her life called Moose, and they started to plan the future together. Here entered a very corrupted organization called Babylon, and they shattered every plan that Yamiya and Moose had, and also put Yamiya in the center of a very huge political scandal, and that also inspired Yamiya to really look for who she really was. Doesn't this sound like a perfect book that I would like? I mean, self-discovery, political scandal, the dark side of the community, all my gems. I did enjoy the bits and bits in this book, especially the power play between Babylon and the community. However, this is also exactly where I suffered and I was not satisfied. Because I feel like none of those elements that I loved are well explored. The book is very ambitious and wanted to discuss a little bit of everything, and the result is nothing is discussed deeply enough. And also, I feel like some of the dynamic between characters is a little bit rushed. I mean, it's called Fire Rush for a reason, but I just feel like it's not very convincing. Following, I have a contemporary thriller called The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This is one of the most popular thriller in 2022, and I remember when I read it, all I could think about is how horrible the characters are, like all of them. So story happened on a remote island where a new couple is getting married. The bride is a smart and ambitious young professional, and the groom is a handsome TV star. Naturally, they invited numerous people to their wedding, including friends and family, colleagues, schoolmates, and people they grew up with. And of course, all sorts of drama happened, and everybody has some motive to do some shady things, and we're gonna see everything behind their mind. Well, as a thriller, this book is gruesome enough. I mean, it's really hard to create a not very thrilling environment when you have a bunch of people trapped on a remote island. But story-wise, although we have so many characters to read from, and each of them have different kind of trauma and background stories, and they're actually very different, but I still feel like all the characters are the same. And the different trauma they had was placed in the story just for shock values. Felt like the author has a formula to fit everybody in, and it's very predictable, and everybody is just awful. Usually I have a different bar for thrillers for some reason, and I just want to be entertained when I'm reading it. But this book had such a good reputation, so I kind of just expected more. I know it's unrealistic to expect every thriller to be at Gone Girl level, but I still feel like I'm looking forward to some twists and turns that make sense to me. Next, we have another very beloved book in the bookish community, and it is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. And please, no hard feelings and hear me out. It is said that this is R.F. Kuang's literary fiction debut after she wrote so many beloved fantasy novels. The book centers around a young writer called June, who is always very jealous of her friend Athena, because while June is trying her best to make her name in the literary world with so many failures, her friend Athena already published numerous books and has a very good, well-established reputation. One day while they hang out, Athena died accidentally, and June became the only witness. In shock, June stole Athena's manuscript and published as her own later on, and she became a best-selling writer overnight. One tricky thing for June is Athena is Asian America, so all of her writings are about Asian history and inspired by Asian culture, but June is a white young woman, so after she stole Athena's new manuscript, which is very much related to Asian culture, she also started to try to tie herself with the Asian kind of identity on a variety of levels. So essentially, we're following June's internal monologue while she was trying to conceal the secret that she stole the manuscript and also trying to rationalize her actions. I looked forward to read this book so much because I heard so much good things about R.F. Kuang's writing. However, when I read it, I didn't dislike it, but I just felt like something was lacking and something was misplaced in the book. I kept expecting this book dive deeply into the things that it promised. For example, the racial difference between June and Athena and how does that affect their life, and also the hypocritical of the publishing industry and a lot more. However, the book never talked about them deeply, and everything was on the surface level, and the potentials are not fulfilled. In the end of my reading experience though, I finally figured out where the displacement feeling came from, because in my opinion, the book is not a pure literary fiction, it is actually a psychological thriller. We have an unreliable narrator, a secret that she desperately didn't want people to find out, a very nerve-wracking twists and turns, and everything a thriller needs. After realizing that, everything fell into places, and I felt much more comfortable with this book, and I figure it's actually not a bad thriller. So I guess in this case, I'm more disappointed in the marketing of this book compared to the book itself, but I still feel like a lot of the things can be discussed a bit more. Moving on, we have a historical mystery here. It's called Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Amanda Flower. This is the first installment of Flower's Emily Dickinson series, and yes, the American poet Emily Dickinson. I read this book because I found out this is the winner of the Agatha Award for the Best Historical Novels in 2022, and it was nominated for the Edgar Award in 2023. So I think it's fair to say that it was very well recognized by the mystery prizes. The story started with Villa, who was on her way to go to interview for this maid position in the Dickinson's household. However, because of it was rainy, she was late, so she lost all her hope to get hired by a very strict housekeeper. But just before she head out, she was stopped and hired on spot by no other than Emily Dickinson herself. And shortly after she started working, her beloved brother died in a animal handling cases, and everybody thought it was an accident, but knowing how good her brother was with animals, Willa decided to investigate on her own with the help of course, Emily Dickinson. Overall, the story was not bad, but I just feel like it's not as memorable. I feel like I quickly forgot what it is after I read it. It doesn't make me feel like the story had to tie with Emily Dickinson. There's no particular reason for her to be in these stories. It's like when we read Hamlet, we know that Shakespeare is in the story because it was necessary, but in this book, I feel like the character, she might be Emily Dickinson, but she could also be anyone else. So it's not very relevant, and the way that she clicked with Villa kind of feel like too sudden without a good explanation. So overall, it was a okay mystery for me, but I didn't feel like it lived up to all the literary awards. The last book that I read through and I was disappointed at was such a tragedy. It was A Scatter of Light by Melinda Lowe. I don't need to say anymore how much I love Last Night at the Telegraph Club. I feel like I've been raving about that book for the whole year, so I was beyond excited when I picked up this A Scatter of Light, knowing that it is a companion novel to the Last Night one, and also we're going to learn what's the characters in Last Night are up to after 60 years. But I had all my hopes shattered after reading this book. The story is centered around Aria, who just graduated from high school. She planned to go travel with her friends for the last time before going to college in the summer. However, something went wrong and she couldn't go, and she was sent to live with her grandmother in San Francisco. Her grandmother has a gardener called Steph, and through Steph, she made a lot of new friends and also was introduced to the working class queer community. The premise of the book sounds so lovely, and I was invested right away because I was just ready to dive into another world created by Melinda Lowe, and her writing is beautiful as usual. However, when I was reading it, a very peculiar feeling came at me. You know the feeling when you try your best to like something just because you feel like you should like them, but you started to sense a bit of discomfort, but you're not so sure about your discomfort, and you started to question yourself, and you wanted to oppress your feelings because you're trying to convince yourself that you should like this thing. This is me after 30% into this book. Everything about the characters started to go wrong. I found out that Aria is just full of herself. She doesn't think about any consequences before taking actions, and she's not responsible at all. It is a very important time for her and for her family, and a lot of things happened during the summer, but she learned nothing and had zero growth. I know that it must be very confusing and very difficult when you first started your sexual awakening, but I still think there are situations and time when you need to think about the people around you, think about the consequences to your actions, even with minimal effort. And she's not even the worst character. There are more people in this book that's more manipulative and shady. And I didn't understand why they're cast under a very delightful light that we are supposed to root for them. And in terms of being a companion novel to The Last Night at the Telegraph Club, unfortunately, I feel like it's all marketing. Because even we did learn what Lily and Kath are up to in this book, their appearance in the story is like when I'm talking to you in this video, I suddenly told you that, hey, Tom went to the grocery store yesterday. It was just irrelevant at all. So major disappointment here. I really wish I loved it more. So that's the 6th book that I finished and I felt disappointed, but I still have 4 DNF'd, and let's talk about that now. The first DNF was Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. This is a historical fiction set in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, talking about a woman called Kirsla who worked at a school by day and helped her family pub at night. She enjoyed her quiet life life until she met Michael, who is old enough to be her father, have very different beliefs, and was married. This book has so many awards, guys. It was even the top 3 on BookTube prize of this year, and until today, it holds to more than 4 stars on Goodreads. But I just couldn't understand. I didn't understand at all. If you like this book, please tell me why in the comment section down below. I had such a difficult time to go through the story to try to understand the characters, but none of their actions make sense to me. I guess you have to root for Ursula and Michael in order to enjoy this book somehow, but I just feel like their romance is a little bit creepy. And the historical setting doesn't help at all, because although the book was set during the Troubles, the characters are actually very detached from the background story, and I just couldn't get the richness of that period of history. So eventually I have to put down this book and just couldn't finish it. But like I said, if you enjoyed it, please tell me why. Then I have Little Fire Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This is another book that I tried to read because I enjoyed another book by the author. This book is set in a wealthy neighborhood in Shaker Heights, Cleveland, where everything is meticulously planned. In the beginning of the story, we're introduced to the Richardson family and their attendant, a single mother called Mia. With Richardson's children and Mia's daughter became friends, Mia's mysterious past was discovered more and more. At the same time, there's a old family friends of the Richardsons trying to adopt a Chinese-American baby. So all kinds of drama stirred in the peaceful neighborhood of Shaker Heights and led to devastating results. There was no anticipation when I was reading this book. All the twists and turns are expected, the plot is predictable, and the drama is very dramatic, for lack of a better word. And besides that, every teenager in this book reads like the same. They're all thinking about similar things, and no personality differentiations, and all very one-dimensional. And also, the amount of time they spend obsessing over sex is just bizarre to me. I understand they are teenagers and it's puberty and all the things, but you can still have hobbies and other things that you care about. And eventually, this book just became a bunch of questionable decisions, so I didn't enjoy it at all and had to DNF it. But I do feel like it was a very smart decision to adapt this book to a TV show, because with all the drama going on, it makes a very good TV show, just not a very good book. Following, I have 2 newly DNF'd. One is Vera Wang's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Q. Stendhal. This book centered around a 60-year-old Vera Wang who owned a tea shop in Chinatown, and one day she found out there's a dead body on her doorstep. So she started her own investigation because she felt like she can do a better job than the police. In my personal life, I really don't like unsolicited advices, and turned out that I also don't like to read about them in books. I did not finish this book because Vera Wang just drove me crazy, and now think about it, I don't like a lot of the main characters in this video. Anyhow, Vera Wang is just so annoying. She does nothing but just cause trouble for other people around her. She reminds me those relatives that you are struggling to hold a conversation over a holiday dinner. Moreover, she's only 60 years old, but she reads much older and she felt like she lived in 100 years ago. And I know if you own a tea shop in a Chinatown, you must be paying a lot of attention to the cultures and histories and things and values, but the thing that she pays attention to about Chinese culture felt more like culture fantasy versus the real culture. Also, there's a 2-year-old speaks very complicated complete sentence in the book. So yeah. Anyhow, let's move on to my last DNF of the year, which is Severance by Lin Ma. In this book, we have Candace, a young professional lives in New York City, and one day there is a virus that wiped out almost all human race, and Candace became one of the few survivors. So she joined other survivors and they tried to find a way to restore humanity. And this sounds like a very good dystopian premise. Except that the book spent very little time post-apocalypse. Most of the time we spent in Candace's head with flashbacks talking about her life before the virus wiped out humanity, and it was just very boring. Writing-wise, the book contains so much unnecessary details about everything that reminds me of another book that I read and I didn't like called The Idiot by Alif Batuman. Every single time the character drank water, the book has to say that it is filtered water, and we even know the brand of skincare product that the main character's mom used because it was just that detailed, and I did not care at all. Not to mention all the unnecessary details about her work, and the amount of name dropping in this book just make me feel like the writing was very pretentious. I can see what the book is trying to do, but mixing all the details together doesn't make it a good dystopian novel. Maybe it never intended to be, but we didn't know. And there you have it, my 10 most disappointing books of 2023. And if you happen to like any of the books, you are more than welcome to discuss with me in a friendly term in the comment section. And as usual, please let me know any of your thoughts and what's your most disappointing books in 2023. Don't forget to say hi in the comment section down below. Thumb up to this video if you liked it. I wish you happy reading, stay healthy, stay safe, happy holidays. I'll see you in my next bookish video. Bye!